Hi there, everybody. Welcome to Cryptocast number 90. Hi, Maddie.
It's number 90 already.
Today
Herbert.
you're Maddie.
Yeah, I'm Maddie today. Yeah.
Right. And we're doing this in English.
Yep.
That's unusual, but that's because of our distinguished guest right here, who is called David Chaum, and who will be known to many of our listeners, I guess, as a crypto legend. Do you consider yourself to be that, David?
Well, I know that a lot of people do consider me to be something like a guru or legend, the founder of the whole concept.
Okay, let's go through the formalities first, because before we enter into the conversation with you. David is, by the way, the founder of Ecash back in the 80s. Yep. Inventor of Ecash, and now he's inventor and founder of Praxis and Elixir, and we'll be talking about that as well. First of all, our show is sponsored by Satos.nl and bitmymoney.com, and we're not doing any investment advice here. No. Right, Maddie?
No, we're not a financial...
That's something we have to say every time because of the lawyers, really. Yep. All right, and we're skipping most of our the steady parts of our show because we don't want to lose any time talking today. Right, so... In the 80s, you started Dijkstra. I believe it was 1983, right? I looked that up.
Well, to be quite a little bit more accurate, actually, I invented the notion that numbers could be worth money, and a way to instantiate that through the so-called blind signature process, which gave the users of the money control over their own money that could not be interfered with by a financial institution, and also gave the users privacy of a special type which has not been matched to date, which is privacy in where they pay, but the ability to reveal, to prove who the recipient of the funds was in each case of payment. So that's we called one-way privacy. All of that was invented and presented in a public conference in 1982.
Okay.
And this, you can also see the patents on it and the original paper in my on my website in the publications list. But in the late 80s, I was working here in, should I say, Amsterdam.
Yeah.
And at my Dutch is going to start to break down in the Watergraafsmeer.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Okay. I better stop while I'm ahead here. But out at now it's called the CWI, and formerly the Meth Center.
Yeah.
And in those days, it was a nationally funded research institute under a single kind of master grant. You could pretty much pursue whatever interests you had. And I was running a small group there of half a dozen or so cryptographers from undergraduates all the way through professors from other universities and countries, and graduate students and postdocs and the like. And one day we were approached by someone from the Dutch Ministry of Transportation, I'll try it again. Rijkswaterstaat.
Oh, yeah. Another very good one.
All right. And
you picked up more Dutch than you think yourself.
So this fellow came to us and he said, the Dutch government would like to charge people for each use of the highway system, kind of like what they're proposing to do in Singapore. And then he showed us these pictures from Singapore.
Yeah.
And there was one problem, and that is that was believed that if the Dutch felt that they were being kind of tracked in these payments, that they would not use the system, and this would then become a form of civil disobedience and erode the power of an embarrassed government.
Okay.
So this was a serious concern to his management. And so what they needed was a way to get money from people where people's privacy was in fact protected. And he came to us because we were the nationally funded research center in secret codes and like that in math. And he asked us if this was possible. And I said, yes, it is. Actually, I've known how to do this for a decade.
Yeah.
And he said, well, that's nice, but we have these consultants here that we're already paying a lot of money, and they do work for the government, and, they say it can't be done, and, we're probably just going to keep paying them a lot of money. And I said, well, what if we could prove to their satisfaction that this could actually be done in 10 days? Would you give us the contract to do it? And this guy, he really couldn't say no because they thought it was impossible and ridiculous. Mm-hmm. But I had some buddies, young buddies at the University in Eindhoven, who were pretty technical, and I just went to them and said, what's your kind of, biggest fantasy about what you'd like to do in the coming months? And they said, Epcot. It was
What's that?
Disney World, Florida. This was their dream, being technologically grown up there in Eindhoven. And then, this was a really big deal for them to make that pilgrimage. And I said, well, what if I gave you, a 2-week trip to Epcot, and you could take your girlfriends, and you could do whatever you want there, rent cars and all this. But all you have to do is make this payment system in the next 10 days. And they thought this was great. And they just jumped on it and worked 24 hours a day. They turned their house into a lab, and we made it. And then those mean, boring guys from the consulting company came and tried to prove that what we were doing was fake and how we, but they couldn't. And so we prevailed, and that was it. We won. And so we just went to the bank and said, hey, we have this government contract to make this reckoning rider project. And they said, oh, great, here's some money. And
now you said rekening rijden as well. Did I hear that
that's
right?
What it was called. Yeah, that's what it was called. And then as well, they recycled the name.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a beautiful story, but how come we are not doing any rekening rijden today in the Netherlands? Somewhere along the way this went wrong?
Well, it wasn't our fault. We partnered with a company called Amtech out of Dallas, Texas, and they are the global dominant supplier of this type of radio link technology where the little tags don't have batteries in them, and they get their energy from the tower, and they send out a code and stuff. And we modified, with their help, their equipment to send out a variable code, which they had never had a reason to do. And so we made a system that worked in 1 meter of road travel at up to 200 kilometers an hour. It was actually tested on a proving ground, a test track here in the Netherlands. And it's, industrial strength, the real stuff. And so we exceeded the spec. No lane control, 1 meter of road travel. But so I guess the reason the project eventually didn't happen in that incarnation was more to do with politics or something than any kind of technical shortcoming. Because we have the transponders units. It looks like a pack of cigarettes with a smart card reader in it that you stick onto a little holder on your windscreen, windshield up in the corner, and drive by without worrying about it. And it records these, but it uses Ecash to make the payments.
Yeah, yeah. My first memory of Ecash is when the World Wide Web arrived. Yeah, must have been something like 1995 or something.
94.
Yeah, perhaps. And somebody I knew, somebody you probably will know also, Rob Gongrijp, who started our first internet provider, Access for All.
That's right.
He called or emailed me or something. Said, you have to install this software. It's called Ecash, and it can help you make payments via the internet.
I wish Rob was still as much of a fan as he was then. But I guess after, well, he took a very fundamentalist approach to not wanting to help global democracy, which I found to be very disturbing. And then he started
I see.
attacking my efforts to advocate that all countries should try to use the best voting technology possible. He maintained that the Netherlands should just use paper, and that was good enough for its purposes.
This is about electronic voting.
Voting
Absolutely
system, yeah.
wouldn't apply to the rest of the rest of the world could go pound sand. It wasn't his problem. And so, I thought to myself, well, that's probably par for the course, because I remember Access for All, which you mentioned, was built by a bunch of volunteers who lived on no food and very little clothes and worked feverishly to build it. And then all of a sudden, one day, Rob sold it to the phone company, his arch enemy, and bought a nice Rachtenpond with it. And those other guys are still out there, in the cold.
Okay.
So Rob Gankrijp, is playing both sides against the other. I got to hand it to him. He can make a lot of noise about things when he wants to, but I'm not sure that you should view his view as, the view of that's best for everyone else in the world.
Well, I wasn't bringing up to discuss his achievements or anything, just as a detail of how I got in touch with Ecash.
Yes.
And what did you do then, Herbert, at that time when he emailed you about it?
I installed the program, and I started to try and use Ecash. You could buy a couple of little things with it. I don't remember precisely, but I installed it, and I thought it was really cool.
Yeah.
But in the end, it wasn't accepted very much by retailers or anything, was it?
Well, I wouldn't say that. So there were several Ecash versions over a period of years. So the first one was like Bitcoin in the sense that it was a self-proclaimed currency. We called it Cyberbucks. And unlike Bitcoin, you could earn it by simply creating a web presence that would accept it in payment. And so there's something like 100 places that accepted it.
Yeah, and it did work.
Yes, and it worked. And there's a little bit of an Ecash museum up on Chaum.com. You can see it there, and you can see the banners of most of those companies. And through the web archives, you can see what they were selling back in those days and so on, if you hover over the links and click on them and so on. But then others became interested in the product, and so we licensed it to major banks around the world, including notably Deutsche Bank, which was at the time the largest and arguably best bank in Europe, and they implemented it with a very high grade of reliability and quality and backup and everything that really caused my little company to learn how to make mega industrial strength banking software. So we were indebted to them for that, and they ran it in a bunker underground in Munich, and I think it was, or maybe it was Frankfurt, anyways, and it was denominated in Deutschmarks, of course, in that time, and they had a number of merchants accepting payments in Deutschmarks, and they were very serious about it, and I had to meet with their board to convince them about this and so on.
Was it hard to convince them?
Well, I guess in general, when you have a new idea and a big company, that it's sort of established in the business literature that you need a so-called champion to an internal person who's a fan of it. And I think we had that in a member of their board whose name was Citroën, like the car, Citroën. And so that made it, it wasn't a cold call, so to speak. They wanted it. We wanted a certain amount of money from them to have it. And banks don't like to pay fees on transactions.
Right.
They really don't. They love it when you pay fees on transactions, but they are really not about to do that. They want to own stuff and make money off everybody else. Maybe that makes sense. And so there was a bit of a negotiation there. So it was hard maybe in that sense, but we came to a happy resolution, and we worked together at our technical teams. And like I said, we learned a lot from them. And so it was really great. But we also had Advanced Bank in Australia, which was a number 2 or 3 bank at the time. We had Nomura Research, which is a main economic research institute in the Japan, and they also have a bank and other banking services. But they actually implemented it only internally, for all their employees could make withdrawals and make deposits, actually, to handle their travel costs and to buy what we call nowadays swag, Nomura T-shirts and coffee cups and stuff like that. And but they could use it for internal costs and everything. So that was interesting. And that wasn't a public use. And I learned later, now I've met all those people, and it recently shipped to Japan. And then, of course, there was the Japanese central bank, which was trying to develop a competing system to ours, secretly in collaboration with NTT, the telephone company's computer part, which is a dominant in Japan in that aspect. And so that's why Nomura didn't offer it to the public. They were experimenting with it, and they wanted to support the central bank. So, but then we had also U.S. dollars and a number of other countries and things. So,
Looking back at this, you did invent the first cryptographic digital currency, right?
Yeah, so the way I framed it in those days was it was the first digital bearer instrument. So just like you have bearer stocks and bonds, which is a piece of paper that is money, is the stock or bond, or banknote is considered to be money. My thought was that this would be a number that was worth money. And when I made the first Ecash payment at the World Wide Web Conference, the first World Wide Web Conference, which was held at CERN in Geneva, where the World Wide Web was invented by Tim Berners-Lee et al.
That's right.
There were 2 keynotes, mine and Tim's. And mine was first. And in mine, I made an Ecash payment, the world's first Ecash payment, to Amsterdam. And you can see a video of that on my website, actually.
I will look that up.
On the Elixir.
We will link it down below. Yeah, I saw it. Yeah.
And so it's pretty funny. And then, CERN is kind of like CWI that I'm visiting now. It's a scientific research center. They mainly do big physics experiments and stuff. So they have a cafeteria that's open 24 hours. It's not a nice place. It's kind of beat up. A bunch of scientists just go there and eat stuff and any hour of the day. But they had an outside patio as part of it, in case the weather was nice. So I went out there on the patio with my laptop computer in those days, and I hammered out a 2 or 3 paragraph press release saying, okay, we made the first worldwide, payment over the World Wide Web to numbers that are money, Ecash. And I sent it as an email back to my office, and there we had a guy named Paul who was part-time PR for our company, but he's also like a developer and just generally good guy around the company.
Sure.
And he, I don't know, maybe put some magic dust on it and sent it out to a few newspapers or something. And within 48 hours, there were like hundreds of articles about this. So, because it was covered by the New York Times and Le Monde and some key publications. And in those days, and after that, it just went out into the more and more subsidiary publications. And then I have like a dozen interviews on, talk shows and stuff. Results from that in languages I'm not even sure what they are and stuff like that. I have boxes of press clippings. So there was an idea that received a lot of interest, a number that could be worth money.
Yeah. So let's jump ahead in time because we have a couple of decades to cover. Let's first mention, because you mentioned CWI now a couple times. You're in Holland right now, invited by CWI, Centrum Wiskunde en Informatica.
Yes.
From the University of Amsterdam, and they're
it's a freestanding institute. It's not from the University of Amsterdam.
Oh, I thought they were part of the university.
No.
Oh, my God.
I'm not
Correct
really 100% sure. The way it was when I lived here, be careful, was that NWO, the
Nederlandse Organisatie voor Wetenschappelijk Onderzoek.
They funded CWI and NICEF, which is the physics part, on the same campus.
That's right.
After the Second World War, it was built in a building near their, existing building, and then mathematics was considered a very important kind of research at that time, and this institute built some of the first computers in the Netherlands, and it was the bridgehead for the World Wide Web and Unix in those days into Europe.
Yes,
from New Jersey. So this was a key location, and then they built this beautiful campus out there, and for both institutes, and then the need to build a supercomputer center emerged, and for that, a partnership was made between the University of Amsterdam and I believe it's Utrecht and Leiden.
Utrecht en Leiden, yeah.
I believe so.
Yeah.
Those three, along with CWI, paid for this computer center called SARA, and it still exists there. So, in that sense, CWI is related to UVA, but it's its own thing.
Okay. Well, all I wanted to say is they invited you, and they're awarding you a fellowship.
Yes.
Which is called the Dijkstra Fellowship, right? After an informatics guru from the Netherlands who is deceased, great guy. And you're getting this title, Dijkstra Fellow, I guess it's called. And when will you be receiving that? Will there be a ceremony shortly?
Tonight, this afternoon. Yeah,
Tonight,
so.
okay. And today is just for whoever listens to this podcast at a later date. Today is the 21st of November. So that will be tonight. All right. Now I announced I wanted to move ahead in time.
Sure.
By
the way, I'm receiving the first of those fellowships.
That's right.
Along with Guido van Rossum, who is the inventor of Python, which is something that grew out of the group of Mertens. They're under my on my watch, under my eyes, because we were neighboring groups, my crypto group and the languages group. Yeah,
and we're interviewing Guido van Rossum in our other podcast, The Technoloog, this same week. So that's for listeners who want to listen to that one as well. All right, but so congratulations on your fellowship, and let's now move ahead to Bitcoin. Because in 2009, that's what this show mainly is about.
Okay, sorry.
No problem. Bitcoin was invented in 2008.
Some say.
Some say. Well, all right. This is going to be fun, I hope, because one of the questions we always ask our guests on this show is, how did you hear about Bitcoin? So can you tell me your story? How you heard about Bitcoin and what you thought of it at the time?
Well, I'd like to add a different perspective maybe to what you commonly...
Because you had invented some digital money before.
Yes, I had invented electronic money in 1982, as I mentioned, and published it and filed for patents then. And actually, beginning as early as 1979, and submitted as a dissertation for my PhD at UC Berkeley in 82, you will find a document that lays out all of the aspects of blockchain. That is both kinds, permissioned and unpermissioned, and their variations. Everything about blockchain, apart from proof of work, which is something I saw presented by one of my co-authors, Moni Naor, and a woman who I don't believe I've been a co-author with, but was Moni's co-author on that paper, named Cynthia Dwork. And they, I believe, were affiliated with IBM at that time, and I think it was 1993.
So the white paper is just combined. It just combined your research and the research you just mentioned with
Dwork
the proof of with the proof of work principles as well.
That's right. Yes, and so my dissertation wasn't just a lot of happy talk. It was it looked like a program. It was a specification language. It's written in a high-level programming language, uses the specification language, not very much unlike Python. It was called Settle, and some say that Settle was a precursor for Python. It's a similar language based on set theory. And yeah, so but in the blockchain mythology, proof of work was invented later, not in the publication that took place at the main conference in cryptography in 1993, but by a sentence that someone published on a blog somewhere several years later, someone named Adam Back, who doesn't seem very interested in what's going on, but he does have his own proposals. So anyways, I gave a lecture recently where the whole time he fiddled with a Rubik's Cube while he was sitting in the front row trying to distract me or just amuse himself or fight the boredom of hearing how a real blockchain could work much better than what he had proposed. So any event, I don't really know the ins and outs of the politics of that, and if I did, I wouldn't. What I do know, I'm not going to say, but the bottom line is that, yes, I did invent blockchain and actually use that terminology in my dissertation. You can see it. It's online on at Chaum.com. If you go to the hamburger menu, then you find the publications. Then you see the thing that says computer systems established, maintained, and trusted by mutually suspicious groups. There were 4 copies on cotton paper in the library system at UC Berkeley, and some of them were checked out sometimes. Right. And some of the periods over which they were checked out were periods that were only allowed certain types of accounts.
Would you phrase it like your ideas were stolen for Bitcoin? Is that actually what you are trying to say?
Well, I would say that I've worked for a very long time with the idea that traffic analysis, now rebranded metadata, or surveillance of people, is a very dangerous thing, and it would lead to the destruction of democracy and freedom as we know it. And the only way to prevent that I could see would be to empower people to have control over their own information. And one of the only ways that I'm aware of to allow people to control their own information is through cryptography. And so what I did over a period of decades is constructed mechanisms that allow people to control their informational lives in a way that fit well with the rest of society and that protected society from abuse by individuals, while at the same time protected individuals from society, social pressure, or surveillance, if you will. And so what I showed, and this is a Scientific American article, it's also on my website that was translated in a bunch of languages and everything, that by invitation, that showed that it's possible to achieve this in a practical way. And one of the components of that was blind signatures for Ecash, and another part was a kind of untraceable messaging, and a third was a generalization of the payments mechanism to allow for what are so-called credentials.
Yeah.
Do you feel like combining the principles of blockchain together with proof of work was a good idea?
Well, I mean, I think that just a quick question. I mean, there's people talking in the background.
There's people talking in the room next door, yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering, am I wasting my time with this interview, or should we?
No.
Is it coming into your system, or
is
it unavoidable?
It's probably unavoidable. Madelon, could you please ask him to turn it down a little bit? It's bothering you, I understand.
Well, I just don't know whether it's bothering your listeners. I'm hearing it
not
through
very
these
much.
headphones.
We get yeah, well...
You're not wearing the headphones.
I'm hearing it very well.
Oh, really?
But I'm more or less
used to it.
I'm more or less used to it. So,
okay.
And we get no complaints from listeners.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fine. I'm good. So okay. So
the question was about the combination blockchain and
together
proof of work.
with proof of work. Yes.
Make no mistake, Bitcoin changed everything. And there's only one reason, and there's only one enduring value in blockchain. And that is because it's outside of the control of corporations and governments and miscreants. And those are related. The reason it can be outside of the control of government is that it's not controlled by corporations, because governments have control over. Some are able to exert control over corporations, as we've learned, especially in the area of obtaining access to information. And, the fact that it's not under the control of government obviously is a big deal. Like, look at China, right?
Yeah.
And the fact that it's secure against attack by miscreants is also important. Otherwise, that would moot its significance. So these are a triumvirate of related things which do the thing and the only thing that makes Bitcoin interesting, and it does make it very interesting. It is outside of the control of the major institutions in society. And that is what allows it to create new opportunities for saving the planet. And that's the reason it's of such great interest to me. So coming back to your question about the role of proof of work in Bitcoin, frankly, it to me doesn't matter how Bitcoin happened. The fact that it happened is a big deal, and that it gained so much attention and value and notoriety, controversy, and this may derive from its lack of correlation with other financial assets. Of course, it utterly failed to do what it set out to do, apparently, and become a payment system. But it is a huge success in that it demonstrated in a tangible way that we can have informational structures that are outside of the control of the powers that be. So I mean, do I think that proof of work is necessarily the best way to run a blockchain in in future? I would have to say no, and you can learn more about that tomorrow.
Right. But what do you consider the major shortcomings of Bitcoin?
Well, I mean, I think it has enough of great achievement to merit, a lack of focus on its specific shortcomings. I mean, you could rattle off things, but I mean, probably make a lot of people mad.
That doesn't matter.
Like I said, it was supposed to be you read the first
payment system,
phrase of the abstract of the famous white paper, and it was supposed to be a distributed payment system, and it has not turned out to be that at all. But okay. I mean, they made it work, and this is a big deal.
You say they made it work?
Well, I'm not going to comment on who's behind it or what's going on.
It was just getting interesting.
Well, that's really not my place. But what I am trying to create something better that I think will change the world has the potential to change the world rapidly in the exact way that is needed. And so I'm very focused on that and excited about that.
So you're now referring to your most recent projects called Praxis, XX, and Elixir, also XX?
That's correct.
Well, please talk about them and explain what they are.
Okay. Well, today most people recognize that democracy seems to be endangered because groups of people are being pitted against each other. Conflict is being created. There are apparently ways to get people riled up enough to vote in certain ways and so on, to manipulate election results.
Yeah.
And we've seen that under the auspices of a company called Cambridge Analytica, which is now gone, but what is said that there's 50 other companies that moved in to fill their place, and the data that was used for that is not gone, and the artificial intelligence technology that's needed to even make it more dangerous is always progressing quietly and apparently at a pretty astounding rate. So this is a huge problem because not only are we creating strife and struggle, but in the existing democracies, but we are destroying the very essence of democracy, which is voter confidence. People don't believe that democracy is really sustainable because they don't think that their votes matter, because they can't figure out what's true and what's not, and people are conflicting with each other and so on and so forth. Yeah. So that portion of the world that considers itself, and rightfully, sort of is dominated by liberal democracy, like I guess most of Europe, is really suffering now, and it seems like it's hard to get out of that trap. Then if you look at the second sector of the planet, and that is those countries that used to consider themselves democracies, where now there's a lot of protest and strife and advocacy and demonstrations and so on. And there's dozens of countries that you could mention in that regard. You don't always see them listed every day in the paper, but they range from, many countries in South America through countries in the Middle East, and then we're even now we have social protests in Hong Kong, but also in Europe, in Prague, for example, and other places.
France.
Yeah, Paris. Yeah.
France, to name a few. There's a lot of social unrest. But now let's just take some perspective on this. Recall that a few years ago, it seemed that there was this very promising thing called the Arab Spring.
Yeah.
And this was going to liberate a lot of people and down there and countries. Well, what happened? It actually ended up net creating a far worse situation than it started with. And why was that? That is because of information technology, of traffic analysis, of metadata. In other words,
I'm beginning to see now.
those protesters there were using social media to organize their protests. The net effect in the end was, of course, that those leaders were identified by the pattern of their communication, who talked to who before what event and after what event and so on. And those leaders ended up, dead,
in jail.
dead or worse, I would say.
Yeah.
And, you'd only have to watch movies about governments trying to ferret out social movements to see how important networks of associations figure in to these things, or read the published report of the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency about how they took over Allende's Chile, which they were forced to make public by the U.S. Congress as one example of their covert action. So this is well documented. It was all based on traffic analysis.
And this metadata thing it relates to what your company does, Elixir, right?
Yeah. So there is no technology today that prevents the collection of metadata, and except ours. So we have, and this is what I was working on even back in the day when I was here at CWI. It's not an easy problem, but it is solvable. And so you'll see it in the Scientific American article as well. You have to, whenever you're dealing with the computers, obviously communication between you and the computers is strictly necessary, and it becomes, an important part of things. And if that communication is of the nature that it allows messages to be traced, in other words, someone to sit back and look at the network, like what Edward Snowden told us the NSA does, so the so-called full take, and see who's sending messages to whom and when, then that messaging system is leaking metadata.
Yeah.
What's now called metadata. In military intelligence, it had always been called traffic analysis data.
All right.
And it's a kind of data that's given a special status, not generally protected by law, but it is the bread and butter for spooks.
Yeah. So Elixir enables you to communicate without spreading any metadata around. Is that right?
Yes. I like to say that Elixir shreds the metadata before it is even constituted as data.
Okay.
So we send messages through a series of nodes, computer nodes, and each node gets to kind of, let's say, shuffle a batch of identically shaped and timed messages before passing it on to the next node. And those shufflings are, of course, like a secret random key known only to the node. So by the time the batch has been randomly shuffled by 8 nodes, so 8 independent separate shufflings where the keys are only known to the 8 separate nodes, you have a situation where in order to be able to trace a particular input message to a particular output message, you would have to compromise or collude with all 8 of those nodes, because each one does a full, perfect rearrangement of its inputs into the outputs, and the inputs are differently encrypted than the outputs, and all the messages are of the same exact size.
Can I say, just for the sake of comparison, that it's like Tor but for messaging?
Well, I would rephrase that for you. If you
please.
don't mind, I would say it's like Tor, except that it's not fake and it's not a honeypot.
Oh, wow.
Say, Tor stole my idea.
There's a lesson there. Oh, right.
Yeah, they refuse to give credit. Even the new director, that's a bunch of NSA. They're all, look at their budget. They're all paid by the NSA. Do you think the NSA would be paying people to protect privacy globally? No, it's a honeypot.
And how is it different from an app like, for example, Telegram or Keybase?
Okay, so again, no commercial product protects metadata. No commercial product shreds the metadata. There has been a in magic, you call it, like, I guess, a distraction. Don't look here, look over at this. There's been a distraction of companies saying, oh, we encrypt the data end to end. This is strong encryption. So be happy. Well, it turns out, that encryption is not strong because it's all based on the same elliptic curve that was issued by the U.S. government, some of whose sisters were learned to have been issued by the U.S. government deliberately with trapdoors in them. So it's heavily based on single curves that are very suspicious and unnecessarily concentrated. It would be like using only the same kind of padlock to secure a whole city, a standardized padlock that was issued by a certain criminal organization that was known to want to break into people's houses. I mean, but the NSA doesn't use the standards that they promulgate. Yeah. They promulgate them through NIST, the National Institutes for Standards, but they approve them, they test them, but they don't use them, of course. So anyone who uses standardized cryptography is a sucker, because no self-respecting government would use a cryptographic system that was given to them for free by the National Institute of Standards under the moniker of it being a standard algorithm. Can I just make a quick footnote on this?
Sure.
Here in Amsterdam at CWI, we conducted the only publicly verifiable alternative to the NIST standardization of cryptographic algorithms. We had an open academic project that did this for 5 years called RIPE, and we accepted submissions from anyone who wanted to submit them, and they sent them out to academic review, and the whole process was open, and that was paid for by the European Union, and that's been the only time when such work has taken place. So, so I wouldn't say that, so there's another issue with existing messaging systems. It's called man in the middle.
Yep.
And it turns out that all the existing messaging systems, as far as I can tell, are subject to man-in-the-middle attack. Now, to get down into the weeds and prove that in each case is more work than I'm willing to do, but I've not seen any evidence that they, in the default cases, have gone to any length to prevent that. And in fact, there's an article in the open literature which claims to show you exactly how Apple could man in the middle any of their iChat messages, and I don't see why that sort of technique wouldn't apply to Telegram and the like. So even the claim that they have strong end-to-end encryption, even though it's misleading to use the word strong when maybe they could say government standard and so on, it could very well be even more misleading because it leaves open the possibility that a man-in-the-middle attack can be applied to break those end-to-end keys, especially, and that's facilitated by being the organization that sets up these keys for those users. But it also, belies the real important fact, which is that none of those systems have a chance of shredding metadata. They are, in fact, in a position to collect metadata, but they certainly don't hide it from those who are making what Edward Snowden called the full take and actually have the capability to just capture it themselves. So, we're living in a world where the spectrum of let's say messaging apps varies in terms of their political stance, with their marketing position with respect to how concerned they are about the privacy of their users. But actually, technically, if there is a difference, it's probably smokescreen. And moreover, because there is such a pronounced PR difference, maybe what you're getting is the dreaded honeypot effect.
Yeah.
So together with Elixir, there's also a cryptocurrency called Praxis. Am I right?
There will be.
There will be. Can you explain more about the cryptocurrency?
Well, sure. I mean, cryptocurrency, is an important part of blockchain technology, and consensus algorithms are the underpinning key technical aspect that enables blockchain now and cryptocurrencies. Now, there are blockchains that don't really have consensus. They have a very fake level of consensus, like maybe you can't even say they're BFT, so even though they said they might be, like EOS, for example, the blockchain that raised the most money, never did BFT. So you could hardly really consider it a consensus mechanism of the highest, of the, state-of-the-art type. It's a very primitive scheme, but the essential thing is that in order to have consensus, you need parties who are willing to do some work and pay some attention to the code updates and so on. You need to create some economic interest in the whole thing. And so all blockchains have consensus or claim to have it and have something like consensus. And so I would say, however, that there are two classes of consensus algorithms or approaches. If you want to read about the full taxonomy, go to my website, look at that article, my thesis. There's a whole article that breaks it down, and there's a lot of different
just
variations.
Tell us what your cryptocurrency is going to do that makes it stand out from all the others.
Well, so that it has a consensus algorithm, as it must. However, it is distinguished in that it is the only one that is not easily destroyed by actors with large amounts of resources. So that would be, for instance, nation states or whales, as sometimes called, intelligence agencies, that sort of thing. There is a global war on that's based on weaponized money. Money is being used for geopolitical as a geopolitical weapon globally, much more so than it ever has been. That not just precipitated the destruction of Iraq, but it's now being targeted against all manner of countries, and other countries want to get in the act, and then there's a war on for who's going to be the global hegemon and whose currency will reign supreme, between China has announced, their central bank is issuing blockchain-based money, and Russia's into gold, and the U.S.'s dollar has really benefited it enormously, but others are not that happy with it. So there's a war on for global currency domination. And this is evidenced in part by all the, kind of interest in Libra, in part. But so my point is that to the extent that Bitcoin really was all about this very interesting thing, which is a creation of a currency that's outside of control of government.
Yeah.
What's really needed is a currency that's really outside of control of government that includes metadata shredding messaging. And no other crypto project includes messaging, let alone metadata shredding messaging. And no other project has credibly risen to the challenge of so-called quantum computers. And this is something that even our friends at the U.S. government about 4 years ago started warning their friendly industry that they might have to take account of, and that would be a very unusual early tipping of the hat. And if you've noticed that China's been very, very quiet in their progress on quantum computing in the mainstream. I mean, they have, even though they have a real dominance in the area of a lot of quantum effects. So, it would be naive to believe that no country has a capability like quantum computing, because it's the history of cryptanalysis, code breaking, that you never reveal your capability until you're absolutely forced to do so. And to so much to the extent that, over at the CWI, I was there yesterday and I walked by this Enigma machine in the lobby, which used to be in my office. And I was reminded that the U.S. government knew that passenger ships packed with passengers fleeing fascism were being sunk by German torpedoes. They knew exactly which torpedoes, which submarines would sink them at exactly which coordinates, because they read the orders, because that's what those but they didn't reveal, they didn't stop them because they didn't want to reveal that they had that capability. So if you think that quantum computing progress is defined by the publicity efforts of Google, you're probably sadly mistaken. This is the Manhattan Project of our era, and to have that kind of capability. And so our blockchain is unique in that it is not amenable to quantum attack, and it does provide the messaging with metadata shredding. And so if you look at the dominant uses of computers by consumers, that is smartphone, the killer app is WeChat. They have 1.2 billion users, Alipay. All the other messaging systems are going to integrating with payments. That's because messaging integrated with payments is the killer app. That is what people want. That is a fact. So what we're doing is we're creating a unpermissioned, that is open, unstoppable by governments and other economic actors, blockchain that includes both metadata shredding messaging and metadata shredding payments, but it is empowered by a quantum-resistant consensus algorithm. And so what it does is it creates a protected sphere for individuals to communicate and pay anyone in the informational space without any fear of retribution or compromise or surveillance now or in the future.
So now that's going to be called Praxis. It's called that now. When are you launching that?
Well, so the XX Praxis X with the double X, as you mentioned,
that's right,
that is now live as a messenger we have 680 beta nodes that have volunteered to run this, and we are currently running it live with the public alpha and hundreds of the thousands of volunteers that are in the waiting list app to use the messenger. So we're rolling that out. I'm not personally apprised. Maybe we're already at thousands, but we're rolling out to more and more of the users on the on the waiting list. So that is an existing technology. Its workings have been published in the academic literature. It's quite solid, and so that's under commercial deployment by Elixir. Praxis, on the other hand, is a separate entity, although they are sister companies, and its main R&D facility is, unlike Elixir, which is based in the U.S., its main R&D facility is in the Cayman Islands, and its focus is on quantum-resistant consensus and payments. And tomorrow, so
that's the 22nd of November, right?
22nd of November, 2019, I will, here in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, give a invited keynote. I believe it's at 4:30 or so in the afternoon, that will reveal for the first time some of the key concepts that allow our blockchain to be quantum resistant, also to resist attacks based on a lot of computers, which is the kind of thing that could take down a Bitcoin, and also to resist attacks based on people with a lot of money, which is the kind of thing that could take down an Ethereum or a Algorand or something like this, which is based on so-called proof of stake. And it is also resistant against something we've not really seen so much yet, but you might call a Sybil attack. In other words, if you have a lot of resources, you might be able to convince a lot of people to try to attack a system. And our system is resistant against that sort of attack as well. So it's a very robust system, and it's also very interesting from a mathematical theoretical point of view. It's the only blockchain, it's the only consensus algorithm that after the 40 years of history of work on consensus algorithms, now we've seen a lot of very elaborate ones and money raised on some very hard to quantify and really understand and complex algorithms. It's a very simple algorithm, which actually we've been able to prove mathematically is order big O of 1. In other words, the amount of work is independent of the size of the network and the number of transactions. So it's the only truly scalable blockchain system. I mean, it's one thing to have. You can build small blockchains easily, but to make one that can grow, see, like Bitcoin, Ethereum, they're stuck at a few tens of transactions a second, right? But ours, we can prove, can go grow as large as it wants, and it never gets bigger than proportionally bigger. It doesn't.
Just to get it right now, the Elixir app is live and can be downloaded, right? I did so today. And the Praxis cryptocurrency still needs to be launched. Is that correct?
Yes, the XX Collective app is the waiting list app, and the messenger is the XX Messenger that when your number comes up on the waiting list, then you can use that for messaging. And the overall name for the pair of sister companies is the XX Network, and the portion of that which is doing the blockchain consensus and payments we call Praxis. It's out of the Cayman Islands, a sister company, and the key ideas behind that will be announced here tomorrow, and the white paper detailing them further will be public probably within a week or so.
Good.
And then what we are hoping is that all of the interest we've received from the community will translate into a bit of community ownership of these tokens, which will then allow community control over the system as it goes mainnet and becomes outside of the control of our companies.
Do you think that the general public will be interested in Elixir and Praxis, for example, thinking about the way that people care about their privacy nowadays?
Yes, I would like to say that I think that an awful lot of people today have recognized how egregious the unwanted surveillance of their private activities by the likes of Facebook, Google, and WeChat have been, how damaging they've been to society, how unfair they are in that the monetization of that has not been shared with the consumers. Mm-hmm. But they just think, oh, yeah, isn't it a terrible world we're living in today? There's nothing to be done about this. Mm-hmm. However, Praxis with Elixir, so the XX network, is aimed at creating exactly what's needed in this case, which is what's technically referred to in the business speak as a replacement product. It means that if you are a WeChat user or a Facebook user, you can just decide from 1 minute to the next, my friends are all moving over to Praxis, Elixir. I'm going to move too. Yeah. It's easy, seamless, and I get the same functionality once I'm there. And if you look at the history of social media, it's been that same way 7 times. People move from AOL to MySpace to the next. They vote with their feet. So are people angry about metadata? Are they aware of it? Do they think it's a real problem for their overall freedom in society and everything? I think yes. Will they then vote with their feet when their friends and other thought leaders and so on switch over? I think yes. Do we have what it takes to really offer the alternative that's sound and unassailable? I say yes.
Okay, that's all we have time for.
Yeah,
we've been
that's
chatting
all you
for
need
over
time for.
We wish you lots of success with your present ventures. We wish you a nice night tonight, receiving the fellowship and the keynote tomorrow and everything. So thank you, David Chaum, for being here, being on the show with us. Thank
you. It was so great. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Next week on Cryptocast, we'll have Joost Jager, who has invented a chat app called WhatsApp, working via the Lightning Network.
Yes.
Every chat being a series of payments, by the way, in both directions. If you like this episode, share on Twitter, use the mention @Cryptocast.nl.
Yep.
If you're listening on Apple, leave a review and yeah.
Yeah, and if you're watching from YouTube, don't forget to press the subscribe button.
Yeah, YouTube as well. Thank you very much to viewers on YouTube.
Yes.
And
Herbert.
thank you, Madelon. Big thanks to our sponsors, Satos.nl, bitmymoney.com.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody, and see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.